Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Swoop Analytics webinar, How to Become an Elite Super Team Using Microsoft Teams. We are here today joined by some very special guests. We're going to give you insights into how we have conducted this analysis of Microsoft Teams, and also some expert tips on how to apply these in your organization if you are wanting to become a super team as well. My name is Luke Sinclair, for those who have not met me before, and we are joined today by Dr. Lawrence Lockley. Are you there, Laurie? Calling in from Australia.
Yeah.
It's very early in the morning there, so we appreciate you getting up early. Laurie is our Chief Data Scientist and co-founder at Swoop Analytics. We also have Chris Shaida on the line. Hi, Chris. Okay, I've got a wave. You guys can't see it, but I saw it. We also have Carrie Basham from Talk Social to me. Hi, Carrie. You there?
I'm here. Thanks for letting me join.
Excellent. And last but not least, my colleague and partner in crime, Coco Molina. Hi, Coco. Are you there?
Hi, Luke. I'm here. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Excellent. So, without further ado, let's jump straight into the agenda. And with that, I will hand over to our Chief Data Scientist, Dr. Lawrence Lockley.
Thank you, Luke. Well, we've been doing benchmarking studies for Yammer and Teams for a number of years now. We like to call our studies the world's largest, largely because of the way that we do the studies. So our benchmarking relies not on surveys, but on actually analysing what people are actually doing online. So every interaction that our benchmarking partners take, we are measuring. So we looked at something like nearly 100,000 teams across 33 organisations, more than 320,000 staff we monitored. Now, just to put that in perspective for a survey, when Gallup run their worldwide polls, they go to about 200,000. So this is why it's fairly easy for us to say they're the world's biggest studies. We identified something like 273 super teams. Now I'll get to why it's 273 a little bit later. We looked at a period of 3 months from December to February, so in the middle of the COVID period and lockdown for most of the world. And I think this is the first time that we've really dug deep into how digital teams are actually operating. So, we designed algorithms for identifying high-performing teams several years ago. We went to the research literature and we designed from the bottom up our product around that, and we're applying those algorithms to identify the high-performing teams. And gladly, I might say, is that when we've identified those teams, then talk to those teams, because the monitoring is, of course, anonymous. They are indeed incredible teams, and you'll hear about some of those today. So next slide, please, Luke. So, firstly, what did we find? We found that most people, we're all aware that Teams was heavily adopted as our companies went to work from home, something like a 600% increase, I think, in usage. We know now that most of that usage was actually using the former Skype for Business features of call, chats and meetings. So on average, nearly 90% of staff in that period we looked at, the 3-month period, were only using those functions, right? So for every chat message, 28 chat messages for every Teams channel message. Now, a Teams channel message is a message that happens inside a digital team. So if you're not using, if you're only using the telephony, you're not actually using the teaming functions, which I think is really the biggest lost opportunity that we identified in this study, that there is incredible value to be had from the Teams platform, but if you're only using the telephony, you're not actually exploiting that value. We also heard that chat was actually replacing email, so they were seeing that email was going down, and this was very much a positive, and it is a positive in some ways, because chat was a way that we've been conditioned to react to chat. So people are saying, when I get a chat notification, I'll go and find out what that's about. But if I get an email, I could easily sort of miss it because I get so many emails. So that's the good part. The bad part is that, well, there's two really bad parts, I think. One is that we found that 98% of chats were one-on-one, right? So at least in email, you do send it often to more than one person. The other thing is that email has evolved to be a system of record, so if you've lost something, you can go to your email archive and often you'll find it. If you try and do that with chat, in 2 or 3 days after you had that chat, and good luck if you can find what's happened, So working in chat is problematic. In fact, 7 organisations we had in our of the 33 were subject matters experts on digital workplace, and you have 2 on the call today. They were unequivocal that if you work in chat, you're missing out on a huge opportunity available in that platform. And of course we've been monitoring the activity in Teams since probably March last year as we started to go into lockdown. Of course we did see a big rise in use, and we know now that's mostly in the telephony space. But the dominant narrative in the press is that we're all becoming digitally overloaded. We're being zoomed out and all that sort of stuff. When you look at what people are actually doing, we found that's not actually the case. Next slide, Luke, please. So when we sort of, and this is just one of the charts from the report, when we look at what people are actually doing, you find that about nearly half of the people that we studied are only doing about between 0 and 10 chat messages a day. So that's not overload, right? And you can see way up the other, and of course there's a few people that are doing hundreds of chat messages a day. They're overloaded, of course, and that's what the press is writing about. So we're finding that, really people aren't really digitally overloaded if you look at the whole sort of organisation. Next slide, please, Luke. Well, that one, yeah. So we did want to investigate this whole issue of, are people really being stressed by all this digital work at home? But we took a more nuanced look at this, and it's a bit of a complicated chart, but we're following the neuroscientist Paul Zak, and what Paul has studied is the different sorts of stress. And he talks about challenge stress and he talks about chronic stress. And of course, chronic stress is the bad stress. Challenge stress is actually a good stress, because that's what really, when you're really motivated and you're really working hard, you're challenged and you're doing good stuff. That's challenge stress. His finding was that you're in that situation when you're working in a trustful organisation, right? So when you're with trusted people, you can do a lot and not be chronically stressed. We tried to simulate that situation by looking at individuals and how reciprocated their interactions were. So reciprocation becomes a proxy for trust, and you can see those bubbles on the top right. So the size of the bubbles is actually the relative number of interactions that these individuals have done. You can see that the bigger ones tend to be towards the right, so they've got high reciprocity, so they're in highly trustful situations. And of course the networks, the y-axis is how many people they're actually connecting with, and those right at the top have networks over 400 people. So you can see that. So what we're saying is that they're actually challenge stressed, not chronically stressed. And we actually did manage to interview some of these people. In fact, that's absolutely the case. They're actually energized by what was happening. They weren't thinking about how often they were interacting digitally. They were actually, energized what they were doing. They were challenge stressed. And of course, there were a handful of those in the chronic stress, not too many. We found that mostly those were people that were probably middle management people managing operational teams, that when we were forced back into the office, the operational teams could still keep working, but of course the supervisor was no longer physically in contact, and they found their teams weren't really interested in interacting with them as much, when they weren't physically there. So next slide, please, Luke. So when we looked at the teams overall, 97%, I'm not to say that people weren't trying the digital teams. In fact, we found nearly 100,000 teams, but 97% of those teams weren't using Teams anything like the full potential, right? So just go to the next slide now, Luke, and I'll just talk you through the sample that we've got. So if you look at the pie charts on the left, you'll see we've got nearly 100,000 teams in that 3-month period. Only about just under 26,000 of those 100,000 had any activity at all, right? So nearly 76% or 74% of teams were dormant, right? Now, Some of them are justifiably dormant because they may have been project teams that the project's over now, so they're just still kept there. They weren't archived away from the system. But a vast majority of those teams we sent were really just dead teams, ones that people had started and hadn't really kept going and so forth. They're just sitting there as digital, sort of trash, if you like, sort of just taking up space, So, but nevertheless, we had still had quite a sizable number of nearly 26,000 teams. We applied a filter to say that let's look at the ones that had at least 3 active people and at least 1 interaction on average per day in the team. So that's not a very high bar. Now that 26,000 comes down to about 2,700, right? So we come down quite a lot now, just what we'd say meaningfully active. And then we took 10% of those, 273. So that's our elite teams right now. If you look at the bar chart just below that, you can see that of the select group, the 2,700 teams, there is a bit of a spread of the different sorts of teams. The self-directed teams, the single leader teams. Some we label forums and others communities. That's using our ranking algorithms. When you look at the elite teams, you can see the vast majority, 90-something% of them, are classified as self-directed teams. So in essence, this is telling us that our algorithms are telling us what the right sort of high-performing team should be. In the research literature, the self-directed team is the aspirational team. Just move on, Luke, just to the next slide. So we were able to identify these high-performing teams, and as I said, we don't have any information about the team name or the people or anything like that. It's all anonymous. So we have to go back to the organisations, give them the team ID, say, what does this team do? And then often they would help us connect with that team and we can interview them. In fact, we're able to interview 11 of those teams. You'll see those. We've got something like 30 pages of case studies in the report around what these high performing teams are. And they are indeed very inspirational. You'll only have to read those, but we found that in general, they were small, between 3 and 8 members. They were very focused, operational, a clear purpose, and working without a single leader. They were self-directed. So they were our aspirational team, high-performing team. Obviously, we did observe a distinct growth in self-directed teams. Luke, just show the next slide. If we compare this year's performance with last year's performance, you can see on the left-hand side, the self-directed teams made up something like nearly 40% of the teams, a much bigger sample this year, than last year. And that's a good thing. I think as people were forced to use teams, those that went in to use the digital teaming functions actually had worked it out. They've worked out how to use those functions profitably, and were doing good work. And I think the case studies are testimony to that. I think if we had time, we could have interviewed 200 teams and we would have had 200 great case studies. So but I think there really are a hidden resource. So these are where the 11 case studies we had. We've got Talk Social to Me, and we've got Real Foundations on the call today. Those in the US, I think Humana was a great example for us. They were our most successful organisation in using the Teams channels, right? So interestingly, Humana, when they turned on Teams, they didn't turn on the telephony functions of call, chats and meetings. They only had the Teams channels. Now, Humana had something like 85 teams in that top 270. We identified the top team they had, which was number 4 in the list, and they were quite inspirational. They were a small team of 4 leaders who led collectively a service of 60 to 70 people. But they'd worked out how to use Teams so they could cross-manage each other's teams. So if any single leader had to be away for whatever reason, they could just seamlessly cover for each other. The leader we interviewed was based in Puerto Rico. His 3 other colleagues were in parts of the US. They'd never met before. Yet he said, I can trust these colleagues, they've got my back and I've got their back. This is the sort of level of digital trust that you can build online if you use the product to its full extent. So really inspiring. All of these case studies were inspiring, and I'd encourage you to go and look at those. I think I've done my piece now, Luke, so let's hand over back to you.
Thank you, Laurie. Excellent. And as Laurie was saying, you can access all of these case studies on swoopanalytics.com. We've got a drop down at the top there for case studies. It's really easy to find. There's a lot of great stuff there. This is actually the perfect segue while we're talking about some of these great case studies, because when we do this analysis in Swoop Analytics for each year for teams in Yammer, we look at the top teams, and I'm really excited to say that of these top elite super teams, the top 1%, there were 4 of those in the United States, and we actually are going to do a little digital presentation. I have the actual real certificates here. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see them. It keeps blocking out because of the filter. Anyway, I'm holding up a certificate.
See the slide, Luke. It's all right.
Oh, you can see it now. There you go.
Yeah.
So this is coming to you, Chris, Real Foundations, your team, the next 10 team, which I know you're going to talk to us about now, was in the top 10%. I've also got awards here. Top 1%, I should say. I've also got awards here for Humana, the MCD team lead team, top 1%. Congratulations. We're really happy to see Humana there. I've also got Talk Social to Me, who Carrie on the line is going to share a bit about her company operations team and how that falls into the top.
The beauty of
I
doing
might say
everything.
that it's when you look at 100,000 teams, this was actually the top 0.03% of teams. So it's 1% of our select set. So very elite, if you like. And I think Luke's now kicked the dog out.
We did fear that the mailman has come, so the dogs are going to go crazy. Let's jump straight on now. We've got these awards coming in the post to you. Let's jump over to Chris Shaida, the CEO, Real Foundations, who's going to take us through his story of success with Microsoft Teams.
Thank you, Luke. Yeah, the dog thing, perfect, right? So somebody comes to the door, the dog barks, they go away. They do their job every single day, right? It's just so Real Foundations, we're a professional services firm. We focus on real estate companies, investors, developers, operators, and occupiers. And although many of you aren't in real estate, you're all living, working, or shopping in real estate. We kind of need it to live human life the way we live it these days. So we've got about 400 people around the world. And I'll say first, so you can locate us. We run our business on Teams, and I'll tell you 3 things as we go through this in the next 10 minutes or so. The first is our view about the digital work paradigm, and we've been at this for 10 years. It's not just a COVID thing, and we have evolved with a lot of trial and error, and now believe that this really is a paradigm shift, that you need to get to think differently about the minute-by-minute ways that you work. And I'll talk a bit about that, and then we'll talk about this particular team and give you a little bit more information about that. This was fascinating, by the way, because when Swoop asked permission, we said, sure, we'd be happy to be part of this. And then when they gave us feedback, we were the several teams that we had that they'd picked out were not intuitive or obvious to me, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then finally, just some of the basic practical tips that we promote as leading practices inside RF, because we are at the opposite end. Laurie mentioned that 28 times number of chats than channel messages. I think we're the reverse of that. Most of our messaging occurs in channels. And I think we had an advantage because we started before the pandemic, before video. The one good news for me about the pandemic is I no longer have to tell people to turn their videos on. For 5 or 6 years, I was constantly telling people, turn your video on, turn your video on. And I don't have to do that anymore. So the first thing, the paradigm, fairly early, we started using Yammer before Yammer was purchased by Microsoft, because we had an inkling 10 years ago that what we were starting to see with Facebook, like, can't we somehow use that inside our business? Can't we get people with that more free-flowing kind of transmission of information, less like directed message. Can't we get people like engaging in conversations around topics? And so we did a bunch of silly things like try to use Google Plus, and we ended up with Yammer before it was purchased by Microsoft. In a way, it tracks back to what Laurie said earlier about Humana, where they rolled this out with channels, which is the opposite of what most people have done in the last 16 months, where they roll out video and chat. We sort of started with channels too, because we started in Yammer. The things after the first year or two that dawned on us was that Yammer wasn't an application. It wasn't a tool. It was a place. And that was kind of, it's simple to say, but it was like hugely important to getting us over this paradigm shift. That work happens in places. Yes, we use tools to do work, but the meaning of work comes from the places and the people we do that work with. And so that Yammer was a digital place. So I think we were primed when it came along. We started using it instantly in its private preview, and we've been telling Microsoft we're one of the most intense per capita users of Teams in the world. And we think of Teams as a place, not as a tool. And there's a distinct value to the Yammer place. It is where people at our firm go to learn or share information about a topic of interest to them or to the firm. It's like the digital water cooler, like the digital bulletin board. And Teams is the place you go to do focused work with a defined group of people with defined goals in a defined time period. And while both are message-based, those are distinctly different places. Like you can go do work at Starbucks, you can do work in a cube, you can do work in a hotel lobby, but those are different places. And so the big part, and this would be a practical recommendation, anybody trying to like accelerate the usage, see what happens when you just stop using the word tool and use the word place instead. All sorts of things I think open up in people's minds because we're all used to doing work in multiple places. And the tool thing immediately confuses people. So this is the first big thing, big users of Yammer. Everybody in the firm uses Yammer. Everybody in the firm uses Teams. I do not get email messages from anybody else at Real Foundations. I'll let that sink in because that sounds impossible to many people. I do not get email messages from anybody else inside Real Foundations. I do still get email messages. But where 5 years ago I might get 500 a day that mattered, today I might get 25. Leaving aside all the junk, which is filtered out. But I still get the other 475 messages, but 75 to 100 are in Yammer, and the rest of them are in Teams. So just as the sort of starting point to show you how far into this we are, we believe that this is an ecosystem that we are inhabiting. It is not a tool. And it's not a set of apps. We've made a choice to live our work lives in this ecosystem. So going from that context then to this particular team on the next slide, Luke, the team that bubbled out is the team used by our executive committee. So the four of us who run the firm, and this is where we run the firm. We are collaborative by disposition. We do consulting and managed services. So we're not in a command and control profession. We have to listen or we wouldn't be in business. And so I am nominally the CEO, but if you ask the other three, they would say that doesn't mean very much, other than I'm the one who's supposed to do these things rather than them. And I'll focus on one thing, the 80%. It's funny, this time slice, we had one of our founders who retired a year ago. He's still on our board, so he's still in this team. So the one person who was not active of the 4 out of 5 actually retired in March of 2020. So we really have 100%. And you'll see some interesting things, I think. This is not driven by me. You'll see a whole bunch of posts from any one of the 4 of us. You will see a ton of replies and likes on posts. and you'll see very rapid response. And you also see, I think at the bottom right, which is essential to the whole ecosystem argument, all 4 of us are very active in a whole bunch of other teams and a bunch of other channels. So this just happens to be the one that we interact with each other about a specific set of decisions and topics and late breaking news. So I wouldn't have, as I said before, I wouldn't have immediately thought that this is the team that would have popped up. But once I see it, it makes a lot of sense. And the other thing about this, the data here and why we've been using Swoop for a long time, is we recognized early that in order to accelerate acceptance of this paradigm shift, we needed to measure things. And I'll come back to that at the very end, but we have made the measurement of participation first in Yammer and now in Teams and SharePoint, a very integral part of how we talk to people about shaping a career inside our firm. So fascinating to us that this came out in this way, and now that we see it, we can't unsee it, and it makes a lot of sense. It's for people who are very collaborative, who pay attention to each other, and never email each other, never text message each other outside of Teams. So the next slide. So here are some practical things every day. The picture on the right is our view of the M365 ecosystem. And you'll note in the middle, we talk about this small collection of places, place where you go hang out, place where you'll leave your screen there and see what's going on. Teams is the most important of those, but we still use Outlook. We use Yammer a lot. SharePoint is our internal intranet, et cetera. And then we've got a bunch of tools that you can pick up increasingly in any one of those half dozen places to perform work. So that's our internal view of how we see the M365 ecosystem. The number one leading practice for us, and we work at this every week and we nudge people, is to have conversations in Teams channels, not in chat. And so I maybe once a week will, you'd have to ask them. I think encourage, they might say chide people to, something gets started and it becomes knowledge rich. And I said, let's move this to this channel with this team. And so I've become quite good at myself doing cut and pasting and redirecting of messages and encouraging others to do those too. We make a big deal about using @mentions. If you want somebody's specific attention, @mention them. We need to break the game of the copying somebody on email late at night so you hope they don't notice, but you have plausible deniability later. So the @mention is a thing we use all the time. I use it to manage my work in Teams. I pay attention to the little red dots all the time. We look at the replies to posts and the how fast people reply, and we measure and monitor that. We have gotten very used to having files located near the work. So we have, I believe, broken for 400 people the idea that I need to go to my special secret store of deeply nested files to find things. And people have gotten used to finding the files in the teams and in the channels where those files originate. I think we did a study 7 years ago. The number of versions of a single file wasn't that easy to do. We did a sample. We had, I think, an average of 17. A file with somebody's initials and a date and time at the end of it. We had about 17 for each file. Today we're below 2. So we're not at 1 yet, but we're very close. We've eliminated almost all of those. Which one of these is current, and is this the one I worked on last? By getting people to work on the files right where they're doing all the other work. We use tabs a lot, both to just simple things like a particular library that has consistently used information. And we have pushed the task ecosystem across 365 with Planner and To Do, and are all over each of the new task creation points. So So if you haven't spotted it yet, you can now create a task from a message in Teams. And we do all of our meetings in Teams. And we do increasingly use the record and feature and have a model for how we document team meetings. So those are 7 things that we find useful. We work at them every day and every week. And once you get there, I don't think you'd find a single person at Real Foundations who would go back to living their work life in email on a regular basis. And the last one, Luke, just to give you a sense of, this is the dashboard. So we're 2/3 of our business is consulting and the other 1/3 is managed services. So we bill hours, right? So this is the dashboard we actually use as we measure our people every 6 months. So we've got the projects they work on, we have their utilization in the period, the number of other hours they manage, the revenue, that kind of stuff. You'll notice at the bottom left, there's a whole section on Work Out Loud, and this is powered by Swoop. We measure the activity in Teams and Yammer of every person in the firm. Those measurements are published to them. They can see where they stand. And we talk about this when we talk about each person's review. It's part of their career planning. If they're not in a good spot, if there are specific actions we expect them to take, and we measure change in that over time. It's a very, very important part of how we run the business, how we are capturing knowledge for future people in the business. And in order to make it clear that it's important, we measure that and manage performance against that. So I think it's a quick recap. We run our business on Teams. We recognize that's not easy to get people across that divide. And this notion of thinking of this as an ecosystem of places rather than a kit of tools in a toolbox, I think is helpful in getting that paradigm shift across. So I'll turn it back over to you, Luke.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. That was excellent. And just for those who are watching along, one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning, but I'm going to remind you now, if you want to ask a question of any of the presenters, the Q&A is open. Coco is monitoring that. So if you're going through and you're thinking, I'd love to ask Chris a question, we do have a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. And I know Chris, Carrie, and Laurie would be very happy to answer some questions if there are any. We will now jump over to Carrie. Carrie, are you there? Carrie's going to talk to us a little about some of the great things happening over at Talk Social to Me. And Carrie, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks, Luke. Well, thanks everyone for joining us over here. So we are, as you heard from Luke, the number 5 team in the world, which makes us very excited. We too, like Real Foundations, are a consulting firm, professional services, and we are in the business of helping organizations learn how to use these digital tools, Teams, Yammer, many others. I think it's really important for us to know that not everybody is a power user. And so what we're going to talk about today on the slides, Luke, if you want to go to the next one, is how to really make Teams and other tools accessible to your everyday employees. Those of us who are on the call are probably pretty good at the technology, but not everybody is so. So let me talk to you really quick about Talk Social to Me. We're a very distributed team. We have actually only met one time in person altogether. We are all over the US. We are comprised of 100% women, and we all have various flexible schedules. And that's how our team has been architected since day one. So like I said, I've only met my team members once or twice, but we have to have an intense level of trust and respect for each other. And we also have to know where work is. So when somebody starts on the East Coast and they work on a document, and then somebody in the Midwest needs to work on it, and then they volley it over to me or somebody else over on the West Coast, we've got to have great organization around where is the document, what is the context, what are the updates, what is the client saying. So from sunrise to sundown, we are literally moving and trafficking information through Teams and the other Microsoft suite. Because we've never met each other, all this trust and all of this knowledge all lives in our digital communities on Teams. So next slide, Luke. So we are apparently the number 5 team in the world, which makes us very, very proud. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what this team is and how we got to there, but then also sort of help you understand how we architect our team's instance so that you can take these learnings back to your organization. So, we're very organized. We have built team norms, and we have a lot of really good best practices internally so that we can effectively communicate with each other, kill emails, and really collaborate. So the company operations team, which is the number 5 team in the world, this is the team with multiple channels where we organize all of the operations and all of the things that are not client specific. So inside our company operations teams, our channels include information about the events that we're going to, the marketing, what are we doing for webinars, what are the things that we're doing out there on social media, what are our competitors doing, what is the secret information we have about them, and then kind of how is our pipeline going. So all of these different pieces of how we run our business, we segmented them into channels within company operations. What that allows us to do is everybody can come and share information as they find it on the web, as they get a newsletter, as something pops up, or as we hear it. We all of a sudden add to the brain of the organization inside this team. Now, we didn't start out perfectly like this, right? We have been using a variety of tools. Our philosophy up until about a year ago was to use whatever tools our clients were using. So what that meant was that if our customers was using Yammer or Workplace or Slack or anything else, custom-built solutions, we would keep all of that information in that particular technology solution for our client. And it worked great until our client base grew and our staff base grew, and all of a sudden, all of our information was all over the place, and that wasn't going to work for us. So we decided, as COVID sort of hit us, that we were going to put ourselves through the pain of a migration. A lot of our customers are going through a migration to Microsoft Teams and SharePoint and bringing everything to a single point. We decided that we had to rip off the Band-Aid and do all of that ourselves. So we had a project manager who led this elective migration, and through the course of several months, we decided, what are our teams going to look like? What is the structure going to look like? What are the norms and what are the habits that we are going to live with so that we can then share those with customers and people who need to know how to better use Teams? We also then decided during this content migration that we had to have a content purge. And Chris made a really good point earlier. Sometimes there's a document with 17 different versions, and we decided this is taking up a lot of mental energy when I do a search, which version is right. So we elected to remove everything except for the final version of something that we've delivered to a client, and then create sort of a best of, and that was something in our company operations team. You can see over at the bottom, the templates as well. So we only kept the best of the best and purged everything else. And then we finally entered into our learning curve, which I still think is ongoing. And that's really important for, I think, every company using Teams to consider, is that, in our opinion, Teams is a product built by power users for power users, not necessarily everyday people who aren't tech aficionados. And so our top tip for this is to have patience with your people who maybe don't understand the Teams tool. What is a channel? What is a chat? Why should I be using one or the other? They need to be taught, because we are coming, as Laurie and Chris said, from an email-based world. And so we have to retrain people to understand what it's like to work inside this paradigm. We're still power users. We still get confused every day, and that's okay, and that should be expected. Next slide, Luke. So the most important step when doing our Teams instance is organize, but don't overcomplicate. So there's 3 tips that we have for an organization when you're setting up your Teams. This is how we've done it, but you may want to consider doing this as well. So number 1, again, very much like Real Foundations, every team is thematic, and every team has sub-channels. And so if we have a client, or if we have a project or something we're doing with an outside consultant, there is a single team for that project. The project manager of that team owns it. They own the governance, they set it up, they're in charge of sort of building the foundation of the house before we all get in there and start contributing. When the project's over, hide it, right? I don't want the visual reminder of a project that I worked on 2 years ago. So that project manager really sets each team up. And what that means in step 2 here is each team has to be a home for that project or that deliverable. So when we have a customer, for example, our team is the single source of truth for all the information for that. It's where we have discussions about deliverables. It's where we've treated it like a wiki. So we use tabs across the top, and the tabs don't have to be the same from team to team, but we like to put everything in there that we may need for a particular customer. And then again, just like Real Foundations, we commit to conversations and files happening in the team and not chat. And that's because, like I said, we're a virtual organization. If somebody works on something and they get to edits through slide 15, but they don't get to slide 16, if someone on the East Coast chats that to somebody else, it doesn't tell me that I don't understand why the project is in a certain state. So when we are all in the team and all the conversation happens in the team and in the channel, everybody can see. That's the whole concept of working out loud that Chris was talking about, is we're telling you, everyone on the team, where are we at this? When it's in a chat, it gets lost. And then the third component is we decided as an organization a common file structure, so that when we go to the files for each customer, each project, everything is the same across each team. So while the tabs are different, file structure is the same. I always know if I need to search for a deliverable from a previous client, I can go into the files and there will be a deliverables folder or an images folder or an SOW, so that I know what we're committed to providing. So this structure works for us. For much larger organizations, it may be a bit more complex, but it was going through this exercise that allowed us to build our norms and rules of the road. Next slide, Luke. So getting back to that company operations team, which is number 5, a couple of the best practices that we have, the channels are also very specific for within each team, so it makes us easy to find the right conversation that we're looking for. We really try and limit the number of channels. There's an art and a science to blending how many channels, how many places does your brain want to go? We've limited it to 7, and that's how many we decide to sort of divide and conquer. Any more clutter, and I think it would be a bit overwhelming for us. And again, using those wiki tabs across the top to organize information in our company operations channel has made it really, really helpful. And then finally, it's okay to shift and change. Even if you have a methodology and it's time to modify it, that's okay. So for example, we had a partners channel within the company operations group. Well, we have a lot of partners that we work with. And so when that became too busy, we decided, partners needs its own team. And we went through the exercise of shifting that information to a team in a variety of channels. So it's okay to do housekeeping, and it's okay not to get it right the first time and to evolve. Next slide, Luke. So a few really, really in the weeds that I would encourage you to take home to your teams, and these again sort of mirror the Real Foundations great best practices. Whenever you are working in a team, in a channel, or even a chat, we have found it critical to mention people. And the reason that's important is because it triggers some kind of notification. It's either a little red dot in the feed, it's a push notification to the mobile app, and in many cases, it's an email notifications. So making sure that people learn how to mention, which is saying, hey, I need your attention on this, is critical. But at the same time, we encourage you to make sure that in your organization, people understand that an @mention doesn't mean I need you right now. So again, for us, when we're working across time zones, if I get an @mention from somebody at 10 o'clock at night my time, I know they're not looking for me to edit a document. It's just somebody working late and they're trying to give me a to-do list for the morning. We also think that formatting posts is absolutely critical. We like to sort of bold the top line of a post so that people can see sort of what's the subject line, keep things in bullet points, make sure that we sort of have a structure so that people can logically go through the entire conversation, and really use the replies to always go back to a critical conversation rather than starting a new conversation inside a team. We also have a practice of posting a weekly update inside the team. So what's going on with this client? What's going on with this particular project, so that we all know what's happening? And that could include, hey, I'm out of the office on Thursday, so don't expect a response from me. So really making sure that everyone's open and aware about what's happening, where are we at, what's behind, what's ahead of schedule, and who's gone. This is another really critical one, is upload your file first. So when we are crafting these formatted posts and we want to say, hey, Melissa or Jen, it's time for you to take a look at this file, we'll make sure that they know what this file means. So upload that document to your team, capture the hyperlink, and then put that link into the post that you're writing. And it's a tiny little thing, but what it does is it directs people to the single source of truth that you've created, and we think that's very important. And then finally, we treat chats as disposable. We use them. Absolutely. I will ping someone, hey, Rachel, do you know where this is? Do you know what's going on here? But when we do that, we also know that this chat may disappear, or I may get too many chats and I don't have time to read them. So, make sure you're not overdoing the chat, and make sure that that those conversations may go away. And then the last slide that we have, Luke, is just a few tips that we typically give our customers for using Teams on a global scale. We can be rock stars with Teams as a small organization, but it's harder for a big organization to do that. And so we think it's really important to train managers to do a lot of the following. So number one is train those managers and project managers to set team norms and expectations. People managers are great people managers, but they may not necessarily know how to manage people digitally. Also ask them to move common emails to Teams. That's sort of a behavior shift that they may not think of, but that's a very tactical approach. And then ask them to lead by example. They may be a bit hesitant. Again, they may not be digital natives, but they may, it's their participation that we have found that brings their people in. So give them the accountability of leading by example. And then for IT, we always encourage, and I know it's hard for them to understand that using something like Teams is behavior based, it's not another telephone rollout. You're not just uploading, a new update. You're asking people to physically change how they work, and in many cases, for someone who's spent an entire career in faxes and emails. And so we ask IT teams not to assume that everyone's going to know how to use it. Like I said, it's built by power users, kind of for power users. So we really suggest giving people training materials and even one-on-one training support by use case, by level, by, what do I do for the organization? We also say don't fall for the bots and apps trap. There are lots of great bots and apps out there, and those are definitely something you should consider if you have the use case, but don't think that a bot or an app is going to do the adoption work for you. Make sure that you invest the time in people so that they can invest the time in managing their teams. And then finally, this is one that comes off a little strange, but it's really important for us. Is our job is to roll these tools out. Our job is to communicate and help with collaboration, but nobody cares about rollouts and teams and collaboration as much as we do, because it's our job. So remember, if you have someone in marketing or finance or legal, their job isn't to embrace Teams and be a power user. Their job is to do what they're supposed to do. So make sure that you understand that people need to use this tool to get their own work done, not just to adopt it because that's our job. And with that, Luke, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Carrie. I love that. Nobody cares about it as much as we do. From my time on the inside, I remember saying some very similar things in some companies I've worked with because we love it. We take it really seriously, and but at the end of the day, we probably care about it more than everyone else. That was excellent. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Chris. We are coming up to the end of our time. I know that there are a couple of questions. So I'm just terrible at multitasking, which is not good if you're producing a Teams event and hosting it at the same time. We are coming up to the end of our time. We do have a couple of questions. One thing I just wanted to loop back on, because when the dogs barked, sorry about that, earlier, we were in the middle of talking about who the top 1% of teams in the US were. I know we mentioned Humana, we mentioned Talk Social to Me and Carrie's company operations team. We mentioned Real Foundations, the Next 10 team over there, the leadership running the company in one of the top teams in the world. And the other one that I didn't mention, I've also got an award here for that I plan to send out, is the Carpool team. Their ecosystem team was among the top teams here as well. So congratulations, Carpool, and to all of you. We are thrilled to see you in the top teams globally. So, Coco, have you been busily monitoring away the Q&A there, and do we have some questions for our guests?
Absolutely. Thank you, Luke. Wonderful, wonderful presentation by everyone today. We do have one. Actually, we have a few questions, and this is for the panel. So Laurie, Chris, and Carrie, feel free to chime in. The first one is, how do you define a self-directed team?
All right, let me just start that in terms of giving you the technical definition, right? So when we identify a self-directed team, When you look at the if you like, the network map of how people are interacting with each other, you don't see a single dominant person, right? So when you look at when we show that map on the dashboard, you can see that everybody is connected with everybody else in a reciprocated way. So the degree of that connection is actually the degree with which we classify you as a self-directed team. So you should not see anybody sitting out there on the side or anybody dominating the conversation or what have you. You're all connected with each other in a everyone to everyone sort of situation. So that's how the algorithm works. But I can leave it to the others to describe how it feels to work in a self-directed team.
I would just say that, yeah, that's a term of art that Swoop has invented, that where they look at the data and they feed back to us. Here's what we see. Whatever you think you're doing, here's what we see with your actual, and it's fantastic to be able to see that play back to you. The only comment I'd make is we, as a matter of policy, we always have more than one owner of every team. So, and this is partly somebody gets run over by a bus, but it's also a collaboration signal that we're sending, that if you want to create a team and you think you're the only person who can control and own that team, there's something worth thinking hard about whether you really don't already have a de facto collaborator and moralizing that. So anything, Carrie, that you guys are doing on that front?
Yeah, our company operations team is really a self-directed team, right? And that's because we have an open and welcoming culture and an expectation that we're all going to share what we've seen and learned. And so, your organization does need to allow people to have that freedom to post and share in these self-directed teams. And when they do that, it really, like I said earlier, it expands that collective organizational brain, because you're not expecting anything. You're not telling anyone what to do. You're building knowledge that people find on their own.
Excellent. So thank you so much. So we have I'm going to try to go through these questions so we can get as many as we can in this little time that we have left. So the next is, if a company is just starting to use Teams, what are your top 2 suggestions that a super user can employ to promote collaboration within Teams channels instead of chat, and encourage people that may not yet be comfortable working out loud?
I can start with, I think that the 2 that come immediately to mind are this. The first is really simple. Remind people that at any time they can see all the people in a team, right? That an individual can always see who's in that team, as a way to give them comfort, that people are used to knowing who they've sent an email message to, and they can always get that same information in a team, as a way of, they're not working out loud for the entire company or the entire world or the entire department. They're only working out loud inside a team, and they always can see who's in that team. And the second one is, people will go where their work is. So if the person who's driving work is working in a channel in a team, people will go there. If the person who's driving work is texting all the time, they're going to text. If the person driving work is in Gmail, they're going to go there. So you need to reach, whether you're doing a prototype or a pilot, the person who's the real driver of work needs to be working in a channel in Teams for other people to work there. And then you'll find they'll follow. Carrie?
Okay. Perfect.
I echo that too, for Chris. I think, it all comes down to the managers. People go where the work is, managers direct the work. So number 1, again, train your managers on how to set up a team, how to encourage people to work in the team and to lead by example. And then number 2, the concept of working out loud may be, again, something very comfortable for us. But most organizations that we work with, the idea of putting a half-finished document out there or asking a question and saying, I don't know, is very, very scary. So at the manager level, making sure that they invite this sort of halfway done work and allowing people to express questions and give ideas that aren't final is very important to building that culture.
Perfect. Thank you.
Let me just add to this. Chris talked about teams. There's a reason why the high-performing teams had 4 to 8 people and usually less than 10 people. So if you created a team with 100 people or 1,000 people, and they're definitely out there, even 10,000 people, that doesn't generate much psychological safety for people to put a message out in there. So really question yourself when you've got a team that's got more than, say, 20 people, is that a real team? Is this really a psychological safe place to have? So people aren't going to be comfortable putting stuff out there if there's another 900 people that can see it, right? So, but if they're their team members that they all know and they trust, hopefully, they'll be much more open and they'll work out loud, but not in a place with 1,000 people in it. So.
Thank you, everyone. So the next question is, in my organization, we have team leads, branch chiefs, division chiefs, deputy associate directors, and so on. How do I convince them all that they don't need their own organizational level team and the teams should be project based, or should they?
Well, we have ourselves, and when we've been worked with larger real estate clients, we all have both organizationally based teams as well as effort based teams, and we don't see that as a problem. It gets tricky once I have my organization as a team to get that person to understand, since they're the people who work for them also work on projects and products, that the work on projects and products needs to happen in those teams. But there certainly are things in an organizational unit that relate to that organizational unit. And so we have a bunch of teams for, organization departments, if you will, and as well as organizational teams related to projects and products.
Excellent, thank you. So we have time for just one more question. There are still other questions there, and Luke and I will try to send the answers to these questions to all attendees. But for the last question is, how important is it to measure not just the usage of teams, but the ability to measure behaviors on teams?
I think behavior and behavior change is critical because, again, not everyone's going to start using Teams and be a power user. But if you can work to measure the change over time in the key indicators that are, useful to your use case, that's really important because that shows growth, right? That shows how people are migrating from an old way of working to this new way of working. So I wouldn't, set a benchmark for how people are working now. Set 2 or 3 target behaviors, depending on what you're looking for in your team. If it's a team that's highly productive and, people are collaborating, that would be a different set of benchmarks than maybe more of a broadcasting type of team, which is more of an FYI. So set those benchmarks and measure over time the behavior change. And I think that's the most critical thing you can measure.
Thank you. Chris, Laurie, would you like to add to that before we?
We found a lot of the swoop measures, we see that we're differentiated because we think and try and measure behaviors, and it's not easy. The easiest thing to measure is activity, right? And that's the sort of out of the box sort of data you get. And, we're always hearing that, well, that really doesn't help us much. It helped us on day 1, but day 2, we've got past that. So, our personas that we have, I know Chris uses them to actually, as part of the performance appraisals of staff. I think it's important that we actually do measure behaviours because, in the end of the day, that's how value is created in teams. We should, and I'm sure Chris, you should have the last word on this because you guys really lead the world in how you measure behaviours and in that sort of way for performance.
Yeah, I think there's measuring and then there's sharing that measurement and make sure everybody understands that that's transparent. That's the key thing for us, that we're not doing anything secret. They can see me, they can see all the stuff that I do, not the content of the message, but they see my measurements, and it's just across the board. One final, really silly, but if you're starting out with people, remind them they can edit their posts and their messages. You think of all the stupid things we've all done in our careers, sending off an email and saying, oh no, right? And you can't change it. So we've all done these terrible things, sending documents that were half-baked, sending them to the wrong people. And once you hit send, it is gone forever. And in this ecosystem, you can edit your posts and your replies and your messages, which gives you a fighting chance if you fired off something in anger to go fix that before it does too much damage.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. So thank you, everyone. We are at the top of the hour, so we will wrap it up here. It would be remiss of me not to put in a quick reminder that if you joined the call today and you haven't downloaded the benchmarking report, you should do that because I think you'll find it very interesting reading. There's a QR code on the screen that will link you through to that. If you have downloaded it and you're thinking, well, how do we put this into action? Swoop does offer a free trial of Teams, Yammer, and Workplace. Swoop for Teams, Yammer, and Workplace. So you can set it up and take a look at all these great dashboards and reports on your own data. So jump over to our website if you want to learn more about it.
We do have an offer at the moment, as Chris mentioned. The teams that we identified weren't, front of mind until he looked back in hindsight. We're offering that opportunity to people that do trial Swoop in the next month because we'll commit to give you a list of your top 10 teams and see if you're surprised by which teams we select using the algorithms that have been used in this report. So yeah, jump in and sign up for a trial, and this is what we can offer you.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Laurie. Thanks for getting up so early. Chris,
Sure.
Always a pleasure to have you on a webinar with us. Carrie, also a joy. Thank you so much for joining us. Coco, great job. And we will look forward to speaking to you all soon. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon.
Bye.